Hello, and welcome to Breast Cancer Conversations, a podcast brought to you by SurvivingBreastCancer.org. I am Laura Carfing, breast cancer survivor and founder of SurvivingBreastCancer.org, a nonprofit organization providing community, education, and resources to empower those diagnosed with breast cancer and their caregivers from day one and beyond. Good morning, everyone. Oh my gosh, I love tuning in each week and connecting with all of you. It literally allows me to jump out of bed, head over to the microphone, and say hello to all of you. So good morning. I'm so happy we're able to connect today on Breast Cancer Conversations. I'm your host, Laura Carfig, and if you're joining us for the first time, welcome. Be sure to subscribe to our podcast and receive notifications each week when we come out with a new episode. You can find our podcast on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, Stitcher, and SoundCloud. We also started something new. If you haven't heard of Patreon, go check it out. We have our very own Patreon account, and it is a great way to support the work that we do so we can continue to offer this content. To all of you who tune in each week, welcome back. We have so much to catch up on. Thanks for being here. I am so excited today because we are going to be speaking with Michel Sadaka. He is the founder of Store My Tumor, which is one of our corporate sponsors, and I am so thrilled to have this in-depth conversation with him. We talk about so many great topics. I know as someone who's going through a cancer diagnosis, if you're someone like me, you're Googling absolutely everything, and it can be quite overwhelming. We talk about topics like precision medicine, targeted therapies, personalized medicine, immunotherapies, genomic sequencing, sensitivity sequencing, and testing. These are all terms that I feel like sometimes we use interchangeably, and it's very hard to understand the actual difference in all of the treatment options we have available to us. In this conversation, we talk about the standard of care and how Store My Tumor is able to be an added complement and reassurance plan to a breast cancer diagnosis. So I'm so pleased to dive right in. Welcome to the conversation.
All right, let's jump right in.
Yeah. So, I have so many questions. So I think one of the things that I would love our audience to know, because we've been talking about Store My Tumor on the podcast and letting people know that it's a great opportunity for people to store their live tissue or tumor cells at the time before they go through any active treatment. Because it's my understanding that what you guys excel in is having kind of like the tumor in its most natural state before it goes through like the radiation and the chemotherapies or neoadjuvant chemotherapy. And I would love to know how people, are you communicating with doctors about this option? Because I'm going back to my experience. I would have loved to know about this, right? And I think that's what I tell a lot of people, how come we don't know about this? No one, when I get my biopsy done or when I have my surgery, I actually never asked, where does my tumor go? Do you just scoop it out and throw it away? Or what happens? And so I would love your expertise and background on a little bit about this process and the intervention, so to speak, of where consumers and people who've been diagnosed with cancer should start reaching out to you guys and what that process looks like and how they can have that conversation with their medical team as well.
Mm-hmm. So there's multiple ways I can answer this question. On one hand, maybe we could start by setting a baseline with a standard of care. So today, almost every hospital, with no exceptions, to my knowledge, they all take a small part of the tumor and preserve it in paraffin, and then they embed that in formalin. And that's done by a big department in the hospital called pathology. We all are familiar with pathology report. And that usually it's all about confirming that this is cancer. If so, what stage it is, what kind of, it's where it comes from, sort of the pathology report, very basic parameters. What hospitals do not do is take the rest of the tumor and preserve it in a live state, so keep the cells alive. It's not really standard of care yet. I'm sure one day it will become. But we're just not there yet. The point of doing that actually is to personalize the treatment. So we also all know that the treatments today are not working, or they work for a small part of the population, depending on your disease level. If you're stage 1, stage 2, with breast cancer, which is relatively an easy disease, we work with all other diseases, so we talk in relative terms. With the standard care, you're going to be okay. But as the as you're diagnosed with a more aggressive or late stage, you need more tools. It's almost like having a fire in your kitchen. Small fire, little towel, little water. Bigger fire, as it burns, you need the extinguisher. The bigger it gets, you need a fire department and so forth. And then, you need to just delay the burning so that the house stays there for a little longer. It's a little bit of the same analogy. And so that we preserve the cancer cells at any point in time. It doesn't have to be before the first surgery. You can do it at any point in time, second surgery, a biopsy, anytime, even if you have metastasis, anytime you have cancer cells, we take a part of those and we preserve them in a way that keeps them alive. And the reason you want these cells to be alive is because you can study different medication. You can test different combinations on them. You see what works, what doesn't. You can also study them from a genomic perspective and study what's so unique about them. Because the way we treat cancer is, we have standard sort of procedures for cancer A. If you're stage 1, here's your choices. If you're stage 2, 3, what have you. And we have these decision trees, which is great to start with, but as we begin to know more about the tumor, we know what's so specific about it, we can begin to say, well, this tumor is not just a breast cancer tumor, it has, mutation X, and therefore there's a smarter drug that can work on that specific tumor. So the more we know about it, the more we can study it, the more we can prescribe smarter medicine, and more personalized approaches that have a higher chances of working. So that's on the drug level. We can use the cancer cells to prioritize the choice of drugs.
That's so logical. It defies the rationale and the reasoning behind the current state of affairs with regards to oncology. It just makes perfect sense to me. So that's, I guess, what we have to do with regards to spreading that word and educating people.
It's a logical progression of how we're moving into treating cancers. I mean, if you look at it from 30,000 feet, so to speak, first you're diagnosed, you have something abnormal. First reaction, take it out, which is surgery, right?
Right.
Second approach was, let's do chemo. Let's, bombard the area and kill every remaining cell in the area, which kills the good cells and bad cells,
right.
Equivalent to throwing a bomb, right?
Correct.
Which still is the major side of the standard care. It is the biggest value one can get in treating cancer.
Right.
The third one is, well, now we have smarter drugs, targeted drugs. Let's use those, right? So we're moving in that direction. And then there's, radiation therapy and more targeted precision approaches. What we're also moving towards is immunotherapy. In addition to throwing bombs and trying to get rid of, cancer cells and good cells and bad cells, we're moving towards understanding how we can teach the immune system to recognize cancer and begin to attack it as well. So it's a parallel, think of them as different pillars, so to speak.
Right.
The cancer cells play a major role in two of these major pillars. In choosing smarter and in making a more informed decision about the drugs that may work and prioritizing the right combination, and in immunotherapy to design treatments from your cells to awaken your immune system and point them in the right direction.
So can you tell me a little bit more about these immunotherapies? That might be a new term for some of our listeners as well, because we're so used to just hearing chemotherapy. And so I would love for you to maybe dive a little bit deeper in what this process is like for taking our own tumor cells and teaching our immune system again to recognize these characteristics.
Sure. Maybe I should just introduce that a little bit broadly as well.
Yes, please.
So immune therapy in general is, the tumor, basically, the cancer cells are smart enough to camouflage themselves and hide. So you have this natural way of the the immune system is the natural, excuse me, the natural army of the body, which doesn't see the problem. So it's, it's sleeping, and the problem is beginning to get bigger and bigger and bigger. So there's different approaches to immunotherapy, and some of it is experimental. There's immunotherapies from drugs, and the audience may have heard about checkpoint blockades, for example, which I'll get back to. There's a different category with cellular immunotherapy, so treatments that are designed from the cells, from your own cells. All this can put into simpler language. The audience may have heard about vaccines, for example, which is a very popular term. TILs, another approach. So there's different approaches to mobilizing the immune system, and maybe we can put them in plain language. Imagine there's a battle, right? There's there's an army fighting some battle. Checkpoint blockades is the equivalent of engineering your best soldiers and making them like giving them more artillery, arming them with better tools to fight stronger, right? That's one approach. Another approach on the vaccine front is you recruit more soldiers to the battle. So you have 1 million soldiers, all of a sudden you can have hundreds of millions, if not billions, and you can do a better fight. The third approach with T-cell therapy or TILs is to choose your best soldiers, and then you clone them and multiply them into also billions, and then fight. So they're all sort of logical approaches from a 30,000-foot perspective. Some of those are experimental. They're in different clinical trials in the US or internationally. Many of our patients go to Germany or Japan because they have more flexible regulatory environments, and these applications could be given in private clinics or hospitals. The process is fairly straightforward. Once they require the cells, that's what we specialize in. We preserve the cells in different formats, so these applications are possible in the future. Mm-hmm. And we cryopreserve them, we split them into different valves, and we can coordinate a whole bunch of things in parallel. So we don't like to think of immunotherapy versus something else. We can take a part of the specimen and coordinate a genomic test. We can take another part and coordinate a sensitivity test. And we can take a third part and release it to a center that does immunotherapy as well. So the combination of those, each one drives value to the patient in a different context. And if we have enough and we do multiple things, good for the patient. We always get into these discussions of what should we do, mm-hmm. because some of it is difficult and it has to be considered in the context of the overall treatment. This is personalized medicine, so we have to consider different tools, and we have these different applications or tools that we can juggle, but we have to right size it to the patient at the right stage. Mm. So for early stage patient, we say, you probably don't need any of this. Second stage, third stage, we start saying, look, you can be a little bit more relaxed. The fire is still burning, but could be controlled by the fire department, which is the standard of care. When the fire sort of gets a little bit beyond that, we start thinking about genomic sequencing, for example, to identify the right drugs and work more smartly. Mm. If the cancer reoccurs, for example, we immediately think about, we need to think deeper about the problem. We think about sensitivity analysis. If the treatment is not working, we also think about resistance. Does this patient, are they not responding to the chemo or the combination because they're resistant to that? So there are steps that you can begin to prioritize there. Mm-hmm. And in terms of immunotherapy, for patients that are in remission or right after surgery, and they want a strategy to stay in remission longer, That's usually a good approach also. We like to give the example of Pac-Man. We're really big on examples because patients tell us there's something they could really relate to, as opposed to talking in technical terms, which we can also do. But the idea of immunotherapy, when it comes to a vaccine, for example, is we like to give the idea of Pac-Man because you see these things going all over the bloodstream and eating cancer cells.
Right.
And when that happens, less cancer cells means longer time in remission, and it's good for the patient. So we try to use these funny analogies just to make it a little bit more stick and make it easier to understand. But the whole point, we have a problem, we have a big problem. We use the tumor to better understand that problem. We study it, we profile it, we study different approaches on it. We experiment on the tumor before giving treatments to the patients. And we also can design immunotherapies on the side. Some patients also have, it's my last comment, some patients also have, they have diseases of unknown origin, for example,
Right.
Which even begs the question of doing more research on them. So as the problem advances, we begin to study it more, and we do more research and help in the right decisions.
That's brilliant. I guess my next point would be to state how in your webinar you went through the entire process, so that you're explaining that process to potential patients to listen and hear what they would be going through, what they're basically all of the steps leading up to that cancerous tissue being deposited in the lab, and for discovery and due diligence. So if you would run through that, I thought that was brilliant as well on your webinar.
Sure. So the process has been designed to be as simple as possible because we understand the patient has surgery and they are in a very bad stage at that time. It starts with calling us. We send them some forms. They fill the forms, send them back to us, consent. Then we coordinate shipping a collections kit. It's a styrofoam box the size of a shoebox. We send it to the patient, or at some centers, it's already in pathology at the large centers. It has instructions for the surgeon or the clinical team to pack the tumor back into the box, and it travels back to us via FedEx. And when we get it, we process it immediately and report back to the patient what we received and what they have preserved. Then we schedule a call a couple of weeks, typically after surgery, giving the patient some time to recover. Educational call, we go over the options. This is really outside the scope of service. What we do it just, we want to educate as much as possible. So we help patients understand the different applications from a lay term, and we also send them some reading material, heavier stuff. We encourage them to talk to their oncologist, and then we're on standby waiting for instructions of what would you like us to do. It's a cooperation between the patient and the oncologist. We're not clinical advisors, but we coordinate all this in the background. And that's it. From there, we begin to work for them, and 50% of the patients order something from us within the first 6 months,
Okay.
Whether it's a diagnostic or whether they have an immunotherapy trial in mind, or they some of them already come with a specific goal of, I want to use my tumor for this trial, and then they find us backwards or so forth.
Okay.
Yeah, no, I think that's really important too. We have a lot of women who are advanced stage cancer, and it's very challenging to find these clinical trials because the requirements to even get into one of these clinical trials are so specific. And so just being able to find resources and support for people who are looking for that piece of hope and new treatment and experimentation, this is a really great option. Yes,
indeed. Finding a clinical trial is a very challenging and taunting job, primarily because it's written in scientific language. You go to nih.gov, and I mean, for the average person, it's written for MD, PhD level.
Right.
So it's very difficult. So we don't really help in that specific aspect, and I don't think anybody can, including the oncologists. Sometimes it's very daunting.
Yeah.
That's why cancer centers refer patients internally to their trials. It's just,
Right.
It is how it is. Many of our patients, from an immunotherapy perspective, after going through the due diligence of trying to screen for a trial and finding a trial and so forth, oftentimes they decide to go internationally for treatment when they have the right resources, primarily because structurally, if you think about a trial, you design an experiment, an academic or a scientist designs an experiment. He says, I want to test this specific element, and I want 20 subjects or 50 or 10 or what have you. So you're really a subject in the experiment, and as the experiment advances, it becomes more standard for everybody. If you look at if this is a standard, if this is an accepted treatment, and I'm speaking to international centers in Germany and Japan and so forth, the patient arrives there, they look at the patient, and they say, okay, so we have this tool, this tool, this tool. And they design these around the patient. So it's a different approach entirely, as opposed to limiting the patient to one specific protocol. It's more tailored and designed around the patient. So different patients, different approaches.
Yeah.
That's the beauty of personalized medicine, is we're at a stage where we truly are getting better at treating cancer. And there are some tools available, but it needs pre-planning. It's almost like someone who's been living in a desert for a very long time and you're used to that terrain. All of a sudden, you move them down to the coast and you tell them about storms and
Right.
flood insurance and so forth, and they just don't understand. It's a little bit. Store My Tumor is a little bit of that. You're getting into a new terrain, and we're offering you this kind of insurance policy. It's a short term. We know that you will need it. 50%. Use it for the first 6 months. It's a great lifeline, but it's a new terrain, and that's why it's challenging to explain that to somebody who's new to the world of cancer.
Exactly. And from the patient perspective, this is new to us from day one. We talk a lot in the community where your oncologist or the nurse navigator is telling you and trying to share with you, when you hear those terrible words, you have cancer, we've scheduled all these appointments for you, and it's a whirlwind. When you get a copy of your pathology report, these are terms that the medical field uses every single day, day in and day out. And I remind people that, this is the first time I'm hearing this. So, it can't just roll off your tongue that easily, right? Because it's new terminology to me. So it sounds like, too, with Store My Tumor being this new terrain, again, it's just one more, option for us to learn about. But then hopefully, as you were alluding to earlier in the conversation, that this eventually becomes the standard of care where we are able to preserve a lot more of our live tumor cells. I'm trying to think, one of the things that, again, just to put it in context and using my own experience, one of the things that I'm horrified of is the recurrence, right? Like right now, there's no evidence of disease. And some days I don't even think about cancer. And then other days I'm about 2.5 years out from my initial diagnosis. So I haven't quite yet hit like the 5-year mark. But it's scary, right? Like I'm almost sometimes in disbelief that I'm, in quotes, like healthy and that I'm okay. Because I've been so used to 18 months of treatments and therapies and this idea of being sick and fighting the cancer that it's very hard to believe that, like, okay, you're okay now, go back to work. Your hair is coming back, like everything's fine, just go on your way. In the event that there is a recurrence, would I still be eligible to use your resources?
Absolutely.
Okay.
So, yes, I mean, we work with patients in all kinds of different patients. Some are living in fear on a daily basis because it's a second, third, fourth recurrence, and it just problem keeps getting worse. So relatively, you're in a good place, and I wish you the very best.
Thank you. Yeah. Knock on wood, absolutely.
And that's we start profiling patients in different categories so that we can help them understand this in the context of things. So let's be negative for a second and imagine if you were to reoccur, for example. First thing that they will see is some mass. They will say you need to take it out. Yes, we can preserve that mass, and it's the same process from there. We could, depending on what stage that disease is. If it's an early stage, then we're not going to do much. We're probably going to advise not to store it. If it's a later stage, then we can begin to profile it and study it and so forth. Sometimes one of the misconceptions is that I can always do this later, which is true in a way. Like someone in your position that applies to perfectly because you've been in remission for 5 years. What are the chances? It's a low percentage. It's not the case with every patient. If you're stage 3, for example, you do your surgery, it reoccurs, you might not be eligible for a second surgery. They might not operate on you. So you're losing an opportunity. There's many different scenarios like this. It really, we take it a case by case, and we say, broadly speaking, if you have a rare cancer, if you have a cancer of unknown origin, if you have reoccurred, if you have an advanced stage, aggressive disease, if your treatment is not working, if you have doubt that the chemo, your resistance to chemo, if you're having a lot of side effects from the treatment, if you want to consider immunotherapy, these are the sort of questions we begin to ask. And if you fall into these categories, it absolutely makes sense to preserve the tumor or a biopsy at any point in time.
Yeah, I've heard some interesting stories too that just kind of blow my mind. I was talking to some women where there was a recurrence, unfortunately, but the type of cancer that came back was a completely different makeup than her original diagnosis. So in the breast cancer field, which is what I'm more aware of, is you can be like an ER positive, estrogen receptive positive, hormonal based, estrogen based tumor cell, but then if it recurs, it could come back not responsive to the chemotherapies and be like a triple negative type of cancer. So I thought that was just so interesting.
That's actually a very good point, and it's a common misconception, and often we hear it from oncologists as well. It is a misconception along the lines of, why would you store your tumor? It's going to change. Tumors evade the treatment, or they adapt to the new environment with the drugs, and they mutate continuously and change, and that's why cancer is such a big problem to treat. It's just a moving target, so to speak. When you aim, it moves, and it's a constant, game. It is true, cancer absolutely mutates, but it adds mutations as opposed to change entire personalities. It adds mutations, which depending on the application, if we work it backwards, you see if it's relevant to work from an old preserved tumor versus a new biopsy. And we have a long answer on our website under FAQs. It's probably number 1 question or number 2, to just share with you a little bit of perspective on that. So for genomic profiling, it absolutely makes sense to work from a new biopsy instead of an old tumor. For a sensitivity analysis, it's not always that simple. We need volume, and we can work from old. It's not often the case. You can't really have that many. You need to have a surgery. It's a race with time. So you can't wait for the surgery, and then sometimes there is an advantage to use the old tumor and do a spot check quickly.
Sure.
For immunotherapy, an old tumor is just as good as a new tumor, because we're trying to use that tumor to target specific unique mutations or antigens on the tumor. And if it's adding, great, but we still have a lot of unique ones in the old one. And we also need volume. So it's just as good as an old one. So technical answer, we have it all written. It's probably easier to
Yes.
read, but it's again, personalized medicine. We're trying to work with the best that we have, and 90% of the time, the old tumor is sometimes the only opens new doors that otherwise would not have been opened. So it is 90% of the time a leverage, but yeah, there are some cases where it cannot be of benefit. Sure. And that's probably at 10%.
Well, this, and I guess the significance of this for us and communicating that to the communities, typically the oncological team is the primary caregiver. When the patient ceases with the active treatment, post-traumatic stress disorder of one variety or another starts to set in. And that's when they start to have doubts. And I've spoken to 30,000 breast cancer survivors. Every single one of them, not one has varied from that. They all say the same thing. And this can be kind of an insurance policy and a reassurance policy that things can be under your control, and that intellectually and scientifically you can be working this schematic to make it work for you to alleviate a lot of that stress. So that intrigued me, just having this discussion again. And I know it's the second time I've heard it, and the bells start to ring, and I think it offers a solution to that PTSD, especially for the advanced diagnoses.
Yeah, it's kind of like connecting the dots with all these conversations that we're having, where recently on the podcast we were speaking with a psychologist who was talking to us exactly about this, like, something that's like cancer that is so complex and out of our control. As the patient, what is in our control? And so having an opportunity where we feel like we're doing the best we can with the resources that we have, knowing that we're being as aggressive as we're able to be, is a really great option to give people just one more leverage of a way to take ownership of their health care.
Right.
Yeah, we've had some patients or members of the patient's family call us and say, look, I don't really care what you guys do. I just want to do it so I don't feel guilty that I did not exhaust all my options.
Yes.
Right.
100%.
I mean, there is a psychology there, absolutely. And I've lost members of my family as well, and to cancer, and I certainly can understand that. The cancer rocks your entire world and family and support. It consumes everybody around it. It's not just the patient's decision. While we understand that these dynamics happen, and in a way glad that, however you enter into this, fine. We try to focus on the clinical benefits, and right. we certainly, when you look at genomic sequencing, and I mean, it's a huge industry with big companies and like CARES, Foundation One, OncoDNA, Tempest, and the list goes on and on. It's almost becoming a standard of care. When you look at, and these are big forces, everybody talks about targeted treatments, about precision medicine, and that's really what they're referring to. We take this a step further and we say, look, there's other also smart tests you can do if you have the tumor available in a live state, if you have the cells alive. Instead of trying to statistically study what works best on it, and by the way, there was an interesting study from Memorial Sloan Kettering saying genomic sequencing yields a clinical benefit to only 30% of the population, but yet everybody orders it as it's almost a standard. And that's because sometimes you don't really have actionable mutations, or sometimes you don't find anything specific. So we like to complement diagnostics and do a couple instead of one. It's like having different pieces of the puzzle, and you look at one piece, and the more pieces you put together, the clearer the picture is. It's a little bit of a similar analogy. Diagnostics are not accurate by nature. It's like getting a blood test or getting a pathology report. You always get a validation sometimes. With a tumor, it's really the case. We send, to give you another example, we send a formalin block, so a specimen of a patient, to different labs, and almost every time we get different results.
Huh.
And that's primarily because, the tumor is heterogeneous. So it's not the same. The cancer cells on a slide are not the same. So if you look on the right side or left side, you're going to get slightly different results. And the lab sensitivity to, what is a mutation. There's a lot of science behind it. At the end of the day, the message from our end is try to do multiple diagnostics and cross-reference the results. And only when you get the same mutation or the same recommendation from two different results, well, that's really a strong recommendation.
Yes, that's a really good point. I would love to pick your brain a little bit more because I'm always confused about some of these terminologies, such as you're mentioning targeted therapies, personalized medicines, immunotherapies, genetic sequencing. They are different, right? They're not used interchangeably.
Absolutely.
Do you mind giving us a better definition?
Some are. A lot of,
Okay.
there's a lot of, I think that, the oncology, the cancer world has been sweeping for the past maybe 50 years in a way. We haven't made any large advancements. Over the past 10, 15 years with the whole genetic, ability to study a tumor and profile it genetically, that started moving a huge revolution. It revolutionized the entire industry. So by understanding what's so unique and pinpointing the specific characteristic of that tumor, which is like a fingerprint, we can better prescribe medicine. And that's what they started referring to as precision medicine, as in, it is a more precise way of treating or targeted therapy, which is we can better target the mutation as opposed to working from a category, breast cancer, ovarian cancer, etc. And then sort of immunotherapy is a whole different discipline and movement, which also picked up momentum about 10, 15, so around the same time, with CAR T cells and vaccines, and now neoantigen vaccines and TILs. And there's many different approaches. And the easiest way to understand it is think of a battle and sort of different strategies that one can do to make their army stronger. And all this started being referred to as personalized medicine, as in we want to design treatments that are more personalized, or sometimes you hear sniper analogy as opposed to, you throw a bomb at something or you use a sniper to just take off the... So it's all about designing smarter treatment. We're beginning to understand cancer on a deeper level, and therefore the treatments are getting smarter. Are we making progress? Absolutely. Is the progress fast enough? Absolutely not. We still, for certain cancers, ovarian cancer, for example, we know that 85% of the population will reoccur. There's still huge problems, and even the smallest dent you can do to extend someone's life, give them more time, is a huge benefit. So different diseases, different statistics. At the end of the day, each one of us is an individual, and if we can design treatments around the individual and more personalized, we can improve their quality of life and their treatment outcomes.
Yes, I love that. And another key takeaway when I was listening to your webinar was also, around the quality of life and also the toxicity that we are putting into our bodies, right? So if we're giving ourselves this standard of care of chemotherapy that is killing all of our cells, that are making the good cells and the bad cells die, if we have an option of this personalized medicine that's much more targeted, overall, I think the toxicity that's going into our body is much more direct and impactful.
Right, as opposed to scattering shots.
Yes.
Yes.
In principle, of course, if we move to precision medicine or personalized medicine, it's a huge advantage to patients. But we're not there yet, and chemotherapy is still the standard of care today, and we never really recommend sort of. We have some patients, sometimes they come to us very frustrated, and they've had it, they went to first oncologist, second oncologist, it's a fourth, fifth, and they're just frustrated because there's no more options for them.
Right.
They're getting the same response, like I don't have options, or they have such a bad side effects from chemo, and their quality of life is horrible, and they're really contemplating stopping chemo and accepting a shorter period of time left, but a better quality. And our response has always been, we are not going to give you clinical advice, and we are definitely not against chemo. Chemo is the standard. You do the chemo. If we can help you with optimizing decisions around that, or a supplemental treatment in addition that could work in parallel, like immunotherapy, for example, or if we can optimize the choice of chemo or confirm, with externally confirm, that is a huge benefit. So, we're definitely not against chemo. That is the oncologist's decision with the patient, but we can optimize the choices.
Yeah.
Oftentimes, we can also recommend combinations. So, chemo 1 plus chemo 2 would work better than either alone or so forth.
Exactly.
There are panels that can study that.
Yeah, and I'm still excited. I have a huge binder of all of my pathology reports, and every time I go to the doctors, I have them print out all this paper for me. But I have to keep going back and reminding myself what type of cancer I had and all of its characteristics. And one thing that reminded me, too, because I thought when I first got diagnosed, okay, you go to your doctors. Prior to cancer, I just had colds or the flu. You go to the doctors, they give you a medicine, you get better. This was the first time that I realized that cancer is not a perfect science, and that there's a lot of tweaking that goes on from, your weekly appointments. I remember even my oncologist, when they do your lab reports and doing your blood, just trying to figure out what that right dose of chemotherapy is, then reading all the new studies that are coming out saying, okay, well, maybe we want to now add, a complement chemotherapy to it. And as like the A-type person who was like, no, I had a plan. I have like 12 weeks of this. What do you mean we're changing it up? And it took me a really long time to kind of let go and understand that, this is a process, a journey, and it's going to evolve, because we want to make sure that as the cancer is evolving and adapting and understanding the new environment, that we're one step ahead of it. So that was eye-opening, and something I want to share with our listeners too, that
Absolutely.
This was news to me.
Yes, and that's, we hear that often, and that's sort of initial indication how experienced the patient is, or whether still, they're at the early stage in that battle. We refer to it all as the choice of drug, as if it's such a simple thing. In reality, it's probably the biggest decision that consumes the entire family and surrounding and oncologist and several opinions is this, because we don't really, some cases, exactly what to prescribe. This is stage 2B. For that, the first line is this, and that's it. The reality is, if you have exactly profile of 2 patients with the same stage 2B, same age, same profile, same disease diagnostic, same everything, and you prescribe the same first line, many times one would respond, the second would not. So it's really, we don't know enough. So it's a huge decision. The dosage, is it responding, and you live in sort of every 3 months or 6 months intervals, or weeks sometimes, depending on the disease. It's a huge decision, and then the family gets involved, or the patient wants a second opinion, and another doctor would have, well, have you thought about this? Then it drives you into a different direction, and it's just a continuous journey of frustration,
Sure.
which could be shortcutted by doing some of these tests. We could tell you that, well, if you start with 100 drugs, here are the 4 that work, and here's the 50 that will not work for sure. So it's a huge driver in the treatment decision. it really helps. I remember times where with some of my family members, we were debating whether we add to this drug, this other drug, and this adjuvant, and this, and we all become scientists at the end of the day. And, it's very frustrating.
Yes.
But we also had patients that come to us with, they tell us, look, I've had this disease. I went to my doctor. He says, well, the first line is these 4 options. You have about 20, 30% response, or sometimes more. What do you want to start with? And I mean, as a patient, that's a very frustrating and scary position to be in, because you have to make a decision based on something completely, you have no idea what you're doing. So there are the opposite sides of, there are choices, and we don't really have a way to eliminate or prioritize these choices, but yet you have to start somewhere.
Yes.
Right.
And we work from, trial and error. We try something. If it doesn't work, we try something else. Well, you know what? If you're getting the toxicity and not the benefit from these very powerful medications, that's not a good quality of life, and it's not begs the point of even going through that direction.
Right.
There was another study that shows that about a third of patients are on the wrong treatment.
Really?
Officially are on the wrong treatment. And that by itself shows you that the choice of the right treatment is a very difficult one.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
No, we agree, and we hear that constantly through our community, and it's something that's discussed an awful lot. We try to help educate the community as much as possible by providing resources, which is why this dovetails very nicely into our mission. But we also urge them to be their own best advocate, and by putting a couple of extra bullets in their 6-shooter, which would be the Store My Tumor process, then we aid and abet the decision-making process so that they can optimize that. And you said something to the extent of maximizing the value of chemo treatments, and this is a perfect tool for doing that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, this has been great. We have notes and everything. We've been taking notes of all of this, so I appreciate it.
Fair enough.
So how can our listeners get in touch with Store My Tumor?
Well, we have a website, and there's a lot of information there to start with. But by all means, we have, they can call us. We have patient advisors that can talk to them. Store My Tumor is a misleading name to what we really do. It's the first step in a journey, in a process. In a perfect world, our name would be maybe Advanced Cancer Solutions or something, because the tumor is the entry point into this journey of profiling and studying and researching and testing, and then immunotherapy as well. We have discussions, we understand the patient's needs, the treatment strategy from the oncologist perspective, and we try to explain how the cancer cells could help the patient at some point in time, put it into perspective of their environment. So I think that usually helps a lot, as opposed to theoretically, talking about it. But by all means, call us. We will try to help you as much as we can. Explaining scientific concepts in plain English is a very big thing that we constantly hear, and we've learned to speak in very simple language. So we hope that helps, and we're here to help.
All right, well, have a great evening, and we'll chat soon.
Ben, you can take off your shirt now.
Yeah. Let's go back to casual.
Time for some breakfast.
All right, bye.
Bye, Michelle.
Bye-bye.
If this podcast was helpful, be sure to subscribe, share with your friends, and leave a review so we know that you liked it. There are so many ways to join our community. Be sure to subscribe to our weekly newsletter at survivingbreastcancer.org. Follow us on Instagram, survivingbreastcancer.org, all one word, and on YouTube at bit.ly/YouTube SBC, and on Twitter, SBC_ORG. If you have a topic idea or would like to be a guest on our show, please contact me at laura@survivingbreastcancer.org. We love hearing from you. Please remember that the content here should not be taken as medical advice. The content here is for informational purposes only, and because each person is so unique, please consult your healthcare professional for any medical questions. Views and opinions expressed in our podcast and website are our own and do not represent that of our workplaces. While we make every effort to ensure that the information we are sharing is accurate, we welcome any comments, suggestions, or corrections. In no way does listening, reading, emailing, or interacting on social media with our content establish a doctor-patient relationship. Thanks. Until next time. Talk to you then.